I'm going to play for you a segment from All In with Chris Hayes, where Chris interviews Representative Mo Brooks, Republican in Alabama. And this is a really good example of where the older Republicans, and these guys are really experienced, know when to mix reasonableness with bias. And weave it in a way that makes them look fairly decent, unless you actually know what's going on. So I'm going to play the video, and I'll stop it at certain points in time to make a commentary.
Republican from Alabama. Congressman Brooks, your fine state of Alabama is a state with a strong gun culture, one of the highest rates of gun ownership of any state in the union. It also has the third highest rate of gun deaths per 100,000 of any state in the union. Is that a problem?
Well, certainly any time you have people who are killing other people, that is a problem, one of the gravest problems that we face. And I would hope that we as a society, particularly those elected officials in Washington, D.C., would try to address that problem and the cause of that problem, rather than doing so much hype and hyperbole that is really not touching on the main issue. The main issue is, why are so many of our youth in particular resorting to criminal conduct in order to make a living?
Let me ask you about this.
And that's what we need to focus on. Give them hope and give them jobs, not give them despair and unemployment.
And he's absolutely right. Unfortunately, the problem in regard to the youth being unemployed, President Obama has proposed numerous times various jobs programs which would in fact help the youth by getting them jobs and getting them on the path to citizenship and being contributors. But Mr. Brooks failed to enunciate that. So we, since Congress won't do a jobs bill, they have a lot of responsibility to bear here. But let's continue.
When we talk about guns and gun deaths in your state, that rate includes suicides, which actually make up most gun deaths in this country. They are mostly people that take their own lives with guns. Is that a number you would like to see come down? Do you think that the access to handguns is cutting short the lives of folks who are taking their lives because the gun is there, who otherwise might not?
Well, let me emphasize something. With every single provision in the Bill of Rights, there is a good side and a bad side. For example, the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, those tend to, because the provisions involved in those two amendments, let criminals go free. People who otherwise would be convicted, but for the right against unlawful search and seizure, by way of example, in the Fourth Amendment with respect to the Fifth Amendment, on the right not to self-incriminate, which deals with confessions. And as it is true with every amendment provision, every right that is in the Bill of Rights, it is also true with the Second Amendment. There are good sides and bad sides, but the good side is we have been a free nation for over 2 centuries, in large part because the Second Amendment allows us to arm ourselves to ensure that we never have a dictatorial government.
Now, he's absolutely right, but he failed to recognize the bad side of the Second Amendment, and that has been interpreted as unfettered access to firearms. And if there's unfettered access, that means that everybody should be able to get their hands on a firearm. That means a citizen abiding by the law and also a criminal who doesn't abide by the law. Unfettered access to handguns or rifles or any type of a weapon is unfettered access, and that's how basically the Supreme Court came down in their decision that not just militias were entitled to arm themselves, but ordinary citizens were also entitled to arm themselves. But Mr. Brooks is pretty good because he doesn't like to speak in absolutes. So let's continue.
Is that what you think, America? I mean, do you think the reason that we're a free government, that freedom relies ultimately on having guns to use violence against the government?
That is certainly a factor, and if you look at other countries throughout history who have suppressed the ability of the citizenry to own guns, I think you see a higher incidence of governments eventually evolving into a dictatorship because the dictators who are in control do not have to worry about the citizenry seizing their rights back.
What about
so there are many factors in our history that protect our democracy, but I would submit the Second Amendment is a big one.
What about Saddam Hussein's Iraq, which had at one point the second highest rate of personal gun ownership in the world, right with the U.S.?
I'm sorry, I don't know enough about those circumstances to be able to talk about
Let me ask you.
Now, this gentleman is very intelligent, and he knows that he's caught. So he basically deflected away from this, because I know that I'm not as well read as he is, and I was aware that while Saddam Hussein was in power, that his people had the second highest number of guns being owned per capita, right behind us. But let's continue.
But this, in the case of Oregon,
by way of example, I don't know if your premise is accurate or inaccurate.
It is, but in the case of Oregon, let me ask you this: we see some individuals who would appear using the Second Amendment in precisely the way you described, right? They are armed. The fact that they're armed clearly is changing the calculation by federal authorities and local authorities and how they deal with them. I think that's inarguable. And they have a cause. Is that something that do you look to Oregon and you say, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about when I think about the Second Amendment preserving American liberty?
No, I would distinguish what's going on in Oregon with the intent of the founding fathers of this country. And the intent of the founding fathers was to help ensure that if there is a dictatorship, the American people are armed so that we can overthrow that dictatorship. I would submit to you that what we have in Washington, D.C., while it may be a misguided government that is making unnecessary errors, that is not helping the American citizenry as much as we should, it's not a dictatorship, it's just making bad public policy.
Now, he's absolutely on the right side of that one, so you got to give him credit. He didn't try to deflect, but his answer was a relatively easy one, because he's part of the establishment. He's not one of those Tea Party nuts.
A question to you, and I asked this last night of a colleague of yours, Representative Burgess. My understanding is that you have a concealed carry permit in Alabama. Should citizens and members of Congress be allowed to carry inside the U.S. Capitol where you're standing now?
Well, I'm one of those also who believes in property rights, and the property owner has a say in when a person can or cannot bring a gun onto their own property. And so that's a debate that we're going to have to resolve. In more specific response to your question, I do not want citizens coming onto Capitol grounds inside the United States Capitol, into the gallery of the United States Capitol, with guns, given the risks that are associated with that, given that we already have security with Capitol Police who do an excellent job of taking care of Congress's security.
Oh, okay.
Gave the right answer on that one, too. Now, this is a guy, and I'll be honest with you, if it wasn't for the Tea Party guys in Congress, this is a guy who sounds reasonable enough that he might have been willing to cut deals to actually get stuff done. But with all those Tea Party nuts in the House of Representatives, this guy's position is in a definite minority.